Welcome to Joe Stunner Boxing. Let's talk about Joe Calzaghe because he was voted by a poll of writers, boxing writers and historians, as being the greatest ever British fighter. And you could make a very compelling case for that. But we need to, of course, discuss other British fighters, compare and contrast, and decide whether we agree that Joe Calzaghe was the greatest British fighter of all time, pound for pound. Now, you can make a case for him not even being the greatest Welsh fighter ever. Because, of course, the one that springs to mind, if you know anything about boxing history, is Jimmy Wilde, all right, a Welshman called the Mighty Atom. Another of his nicknames was the Ghost with the Hammer in his Hand, the Tylerstown Terror. Magnificent fighter, absolutely tiny man. This guy was below what would be the modern day strawweight limit. He was about 5'2.5" tall. I got that off BoxRec. It sounds about right from the other things I've read. And his record, of course, as with a lot of the old timers, is debatable. But I always go with what's on BoxRec, not because it's accurate necessarily or absolutely accurate. Sometimes it is, but it's just the one that everyone goes to, BoxRec. Okay, so I think I would dispute this record that they list of Jimmy Wilde's, but they're saying on BoxRec that he had 132 wins, 98 KOs, 4 defeats. He was stopped 3 times, and a draw. And 2 of those 4 defeats were right at the end of his career when he lost to Pete Herman. He was stopped in the 17th round of a 20-round fight, and then he lost in the 7th round. He lost his world flyweight title to Pancho Villa. That was in 7 rounds of a 15-round fight. Now, Wilde also fought hundreds of boxing booth contests. In case you don't know, boxing booth, if you went to the fairground, there would be a boxing booth there, and you could win a pound or 5, maybe even a couple of quid or whatever it was at the time. I'm going back to over 100 years ago. And if you went the distance or you survived 3 rounds with Wilde in this case, or whoever the fighter was, you'd win a quid or whatever, it was 5 or maybe whatever. I don't even know what it was, but Wilde had hundreds of these boxing booth fights. Again, he was a very tiny man, really tiny man. The knock against him is that if you look at his record, there aren't many Hall of Famer. In fact, I don't think he ever beat another Hall of Famer. That's a tenuous title, Hall of Famer, but you know what I mean. The quality of opposition is the knock against him. I would say that's a valid argument, but I would also say that you have to consider the amount of people Wilde fought who were way, way bigger than him. I mean, featherweights, some of them were. So you imagine a strawweight fighting a featherweight now. And okay, they were not the greatest fighters ever. A lot of them weren't bad, and a lot of them were very underrated. But Wilde was knocking them out. It wasn't just beating them, he was knocking the crap out of them. And a lot of people have said, well, not a lot, but some historians have said it's all a bit more like legend than history, or a bit more of a myth involved. I would dispute that. I think, as usual, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Wilde was an exceptional fighter who fought frequently much, much bigger men. And one of his defeats was avenged. That was the stoppage defeat to Tansy Lee. He beat him in the return match. Like I say, 2 of those defeats were right at the end of his career, but the rest, he just tore the place up. And he was world flyweight champion. He also held the British title and the European title. And we are talking about a fighter who, I mean, we're going back, like I say, 100 and when did he turn pro? Well, there's a very good autobiography that was released, I think, last year, which I read. I think he turned pro probably about 1910, I think it was 1911, 12, that sort of time. So we're talking 110 years ago, 115 years ago, when, of course, boxing, like so much else in those times, was the Wild West. So I would say that you can make a very strong case for Jimmy Wilde having a greater career than Joe Calzaghe. All right. there are other fighters. Ken Buchanan is another one who deserves mentioning. Ken Buchanan, Scottish fighter, lightweight world champ, twice beat Ismail Laguna. If you don't know who that is, that's a Hall of Fame fighter. And on the first occasion, Buchanan beat him in San Juan, his home city. Very difficult to do. Fought during the 15-round era. His only stoppage loss was to Roberto Duran when he lost his world lightweight title. That was a low punch. Duran admitted it. I love Duran, but he got away with murder in that fight. Never gave Buchanan a rematch because he knew Buchanan was too tricky. Buchanan was a beautiful stylist, excellent boxer, beautiful jab. Boxed your head off. He had 61, again, according to BoxRec, 61 wins with 27 KOs, 8 defeats, only stopped by Duran, no draws. But of the 8 defeats, 4 were right at the end of his career, when he lost just 4 decisions to people who just stood them on their head if he was in his prime. And that was in sort of 81, 82. I think he lost 5 of those defeats were in his last 7 fights. But the people he beat, Guts Ishimatu, brilliant, himself a very, very good fighter. He beat past it Buchanan over, I think, 15. It was a unanimous decision over 15. He was a pretty good fighter. But again, if you look at the victories that Buchanan had, including one over Jim Watt for the British title, that was a couple of years after he lost to Duran. Watt was up and coming, but the older fighter Buchanan had enough nous to outpoint Watt comfortably. I think you can see that fight on YouTube. And Watt would go on to have a very successful career as a lightweight champ, WBC lightweight champ. But he lost to Buchanan, a British title fight. But the 2 Laguna fights are what stand out for me. He also beat Ruben Navarro, who was a good fighter. That was the defense of his lightweight title. Who else? He was just a really great stylist, a really great fighter, and probably. I mean, as time goes by, people tend to forget how good some fighters were. There's a lot of fighters who are very, very underrated. I mean, we live in a time when Joe Calzaghe is revered. He's still alive. He's incredibly popular. He was undefeated in 46 fights, which looks very, very flashy. Was he better than Buchanan? Again, debatable. And again, I want to emphasize this is not an anti Joe Calzaghe video. I like Calzaghe. I have great respect for what he achieved. He did achieve a tremendous amount. But the idea that he is the greatest British fighter ever, that does bear debating. I mean, bear debating. And getting back to some of the older fighters, I mean, there are a couple of Jewish guys who are worth mentioning, British Jews who are worth mentioning. One is Ted Kid Lewis. He was welterweight world champ twice, was it? Twice. Great fighter, just a great fighter, who had a total of 232 wins, 77 by KO. He did lose 46 times, but he also had 23 draws. But this is a guy from the old days who, they've used to fight a couple of hundred fights, these Hall of Fame old timers. He had a rivalry with Jack Britton, who himself was a very, very good fighter. And I believe that they fought about 20 times. I don't know the exact figure, but it was over 230 rounds, I think, 240 rounds, something like that, 220, 240 rounds. They must have got sick of the sight of each other. But fighters in those days used to do that. They'd fight, 10 times, 15, 20 times. They'd fight each other. Lewis, apart from being world champ, was also British and European champion. I think he took on. I mean, this guy was fearless. He took on Georges Carpentier, and I don't. Yeah, he didn't win, did he? I can't remember that. I'm trying to remember doing this off memory, but I'm trying to remember the fight, like what I've read about it. But again, Carpentier, another Hall of Famer. Yeah, just a brilliant fighter. The other Jewish fighter who deserves a good mention would be another guy with the Kid moniker, Jack Kid Berg, who was light welterweight champion. Light welterweight champ, and I believe he beat Tony Canzoneri. Did he have 3 fights with Tony Canzoneri? And I think he won 1, lost 2. He got stopped once early. But again, a great fighter. And again, I repeat, kind of underrated. It does annoy me when these people with their glossy records, sometimes undefeated, get lauded while others just get sort of ignored and forgotten. Some of these old timers were really great fighters. I mean, Jack Kid Berg, 157 wins, 61 KOs, 26 defeats. He was stopped 9 times, but then if you fight the best, you're going to get stopped. He had 9 draws as well. The Whitechapel Whirlwind, he called himself. He fought good. I think he beat Kid Chocolate as well. Yeah, I think he beat Kid Chocolate. Anyway, again, someone who lived in a very different era. In his case, it would be the 30s, late 30s, throughout the 40s, I believe. Probably, when did he turn pro? I think it was probably in the mid 30s. No, it wasn't before that. It was before that. Yeah, it was before that. Anyway, I can't remember the exact details. I might do a video on some of these fighters. Kid Berg, I know he was very active in the 1940s, but he fought for age. I mean, obviously he fought for ages. He had nearly 180 fights or whatever it was. I think he turned pro in the 20-something. I'll have to look this up. So what happens when you get a little bit older? Fucking information falls out your ears. But he was at his peak, sort of, I think, late 30s, early 30s up to throughout the 40s. But anyway, Jack Kid Berg, don't forget about him. Very, very good fighter indeed. Another Jewish kid. Who else have we got that we should mention as a rival to Calzaghe? Well, Lennox Lewis, of course, more recently. Undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Beat the shell of Mike Tyson. Beat Evander Holyfield when he had something left. Wasn't at his peak, but he still had a little bit left. Scored a lot of great wins. His 2 defeats were avenged by stoppages. Probably the best British heavyweight that we've ever had, Lennox Lewis. Great career, incredible career. John Conte would deserve a mention. WBC light heavyweight champ, had 2 fights with Matthew Saad Muhammad. The first was a barn burner. Second one, disappointing for Conte. He got stopped, cut, I think, if I remember rightly. But again, very good stylist. His peak was not that long. I go for longevity when I make judgments about historical judgments about fighters. It's like Wilde. Jimmy Wilde, he had a long career. Kid Berg had a long career. Hence the reason they had so many fights. Ted Kid Lewis did. Buchanan in the 60s and 70s, he had quite a few fights. And of course, they were fighting, well, in the case of Buchanan, it was 15 rounders. If you go way back to Wilde's time, it could be 20 rounds. Now, if you look at Calzaghe's record, I mean, again, he finished with 46 wins, no draws, no defeats, and he had 32 KOs. I repeat, this is not an anti-Joe Calzaghe video. His last 2 fights were against Roy Jones Jr., who was way past his best. And Jones had Calzaghe on the floor in the first round. Jones, in his prime, I think, would have beaten Calzaghe. I don't think Calzaghe would have. Calzaghe had high output, slapped a lot, threw an awful lot of punches, had hand problems because of a lot of his punches weren't delivered correctly. He did beat Jones, but in his prime, I think Jones would have probably beaten Calzaghe. Calzaghe did beat Bernard Hopkins in his penultimate fight as well. Split decision win. Calzaghe was on the floor in the first round of that fight as well. Yeah, Hopkins had something left. He was a freak when he went on. I think he had his final fight. He was what, 51 or something. Lost to Joe. What's his name? Joseph Smith. But for me, the two fights that Calzaghe had that really put him in the argument are, I think his best performance was against Mikhail Kessler, who was undefeated in 39 fights. Calzaghe was having difficulty with Kessler in the opening 5, 6 rounds, maybe half the fight. I mean, Kessler was very, very good, very, very good. But what I liked about that performance is that Joe sort of amended his style. He switched on the hop, he switched up gears, and he made adjustments. And I think only the great, great fighters can do that. If they're at the highest level and they have to make adjustments, it's very difficult to do. But I think Joe did it and did it quite successfully. Brilliant win for Calzaghe against Kessler. Kessler, a very, very good champion. That was for the WBC and WBO super middleweight titles. The Jones and Hopkins fights were at light heavy. He beat, I thought the Sakio Bika, that was a tough fight. You know, Joe proved his toughness against Chris Eubank when he won the vacant WBO title, and he cites that as his most difficult fight. That was a real baptism by fire. But he had other fights, and Sakio Bika is one of them where he really, Joe had to work. Sakio Bika, I mean, he didn't win that many rounds, maybe 3 or 4, but he made Joe work really, really hard. And other fight like Kabiri Salim, you know, that was an easy win for Joe in terms of rounds won, but still very, very, very difficult fight. He had shootouts as well. Remember Byron Mitchell put Joe on the floor in the second round. Joe came right back and stopped him. I mean, what a round that was. But there were also a lot of fights like people like Will McIntyre, Tucker Pudwell. These were gimme fights. Peter Manfredo was way too small for Joe. He was really just a middleweight. He did beat Charles Brewer. That was a good win. Unanimous decision. That was a shootout as well. So yeah, you know, Omar Shaker, that was a decent win. And he was outpointing people like David Starry, Robin Reed. That was a close fight. A lot of people thought Reed edged it. You can make a case for that, yeah. But the quality of his opposition, Joe's opposition, I'd say it was, you know, pretty good, but not on a par with someone like Carl Froch, who, for whatever reason, seems to be Joe's, you know, sort of bête noire rival, even though they were pretty much in different eras. But Froch lost twice. He lost to, you know, Andre Ward, and he lost to Kessler. He did avenge the Kessler defeat. So what do you like? Do you like the undefeated record? Undefeated records don't impress me that much. They are an achievement, of course they are. But like I was saying, you know, some of the old timers had over 20 losses. It doesn't actually fucking matter to me. It's who did they fight? How often did they fight? How long were the fights? I don't know. Look, Joe Calzaghe, without question, was a great fighter. One of the great super middleweights. I have no hesitation in saying that. The greatest fighter, pound for pound, British fighter of all time. Again, I would dispute that he's the greatest Welsh fighter of all time. I wouldn't put him at the top in terms of British, being the best of British. We are talking about 140 years of Queensberry rules glove fighting anyway. Yeah. Near the top, yes. At the top, I'm a little bit sceptical, to be honest. But you tell me what you think. All right, I've mentioned some of the other great British fighters, but if I've missed anyone out that you think deserves a mention, of course you've got Benn and Eubank and you know, I suppose you could say, who else we got? Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua. Would you put pound for pound? Would you put Calzaghe above those? Maybe you would. But I want to hear your opinions. Let me know. Thanks for watching the video. It's been quite a long one today. Let me know what you think. If you like the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because I produce videos pretty much every day. There's always something to watch. If you put the kettle on, watch Joe Stunner Boxing and spread the word about Joe Stunner Boxing. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I will catch you later. Bye for now.